Welcome to the Monstrous Flesh podcast, where we explore the evolution and role of women and non-binary people in horror, as well as familiar tropes of the genre through a feminist lens. I'm Meg, one of your podcast hosts.
And I'm Clelia, the other host of the podcast.
And in this series, we're turning our attention to witches and the portrayal of witchcraft in horror cinema around the world. And in each episode, we dissect one film we feel fits the bill particularly well. And today, very excitingly, our film is Bulbbul. So... ooh, I'm excited. So this is one that I don't see people talking about very often. So it's very possible that our listeners will not have heard of it. So would you like to give us a little synopsis, Clelia?
Set in the late 19th century Bengal presidency, the story revolves around a child bride named Bulbbul, who grows up in a wealthy and oppressive household. The narrative follows her transformation from an innocent girl to a strong, enigmatic woman harboring deep secrets. After enduring years of abuse and neglect, Bulbbul rises to a position of power following the mysterious death of men in her village. These events are linked to local legends of a churel or demon woman or witch or goddess, depending who you ask, who haunts the village.
So in full disclosure, this was one of Clelia's picks. Not that we ever have disagreements when we put in the series together, but we both come with different things. And I'd not seen it until watching it this week for this, and I'm so glad that you picked it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, and I came across it when I did the course last year about international folklore and the week on Bollywood horror or Southeast Asian horror, and I just thought it was such an interesting one, and if people have seen it, and it would be fair enough for people to wonder why including this film in a season about witches, but I thought it was so interesting to have this depiction, and she's referred to as a witch only once or twice, I think, in the film, and by a certain character, but in the sense that witches are a man-made monster. I think the development of the story is kind of fits extremely well with what we're talking about in this season. So so I was really excited for you to see it, and that you said that well, we'll talk about it obviously. Your response to the film. I think obviously there are some, and we'll talk about it as well. There's some stuff that could have been handled differently or better in the film. So it's not like a flawless film, but I think it's amazing. I do still, I would still defend it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I would defend it, and I think there are some elements to it that we'll talk about that I think could have been done in a different way that didn't necessarily need to be presented in the way that they were. But I think the overall message of it, and the very feminist message of it, I think is so vital, particularly. So it was from 2020, weren't it? It came out in 2020 as well. And, we know that, unfortunately, I mean, globally, it's not just a problem in sort of, Southeast Asia. Globally, there are still massive problems in terms of how women are treated. And the themes in this film are very much tapping into that, I think, in a way that it's very powerful to see it done in that way, I think. That I've just started a sentence with no idea how to finish it.
No, but I know what you mean. I mean, it strikes a chord, and because it is presented as not as a fable, but it is presented, it's kind of like with those fairy tale edges to it. I think works really well, because then it gives it that universal, kind of, universal feel to it. As you said, it doesn't, even though it is set, in a precise time and place in history, it transcends the setting, 100%.
Oh yeah,
so.
yeah, I think so, and I think although it's a historical film, in as much as it's set in a different historical context, the way that it's dealing with the themes is very modern. I think very. Very sort of, and I think the way that they're presented, you wouldn't have seen that in a film that were made previously.
Absolutely.
So it's really exciting, and it's really exciting to see a film like that on Netflix. I think
exactly. I think it was amazing, to see a film like this being picked by Netflix, and also for people who might have a certain preconception of Bollywood films. I did really like, and we'll discuss this more, as we discuss the film, as we deep dive into the film. But the fact that it plays with the preconception of musical numbers in film. And I think there's different points in the film where you think, it's gonna break into songs, and it doesn't. And I really really like this. Which should I start with some little facts about the filmmaker and the film, and then we'll discuss the film. So the film is written and directed by Anvita Dutt Guptan, who is an Indian dialogue writer, screenplay writer, story writer, lyricist, and as I said, director of Bollywood films. And Bulbbul was in fact her first feature, which I think is kind of remarkable.
Amazing.
Really.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know about you, but I think that the fact that she has a background as a lyricist, comes, even though obviously, we work with the translation here, work with the subtitle version, but there's real poetry, I think, to the dialogue in this film. So how the story came about of the film. So she said she wrote the first 2 pages of the story after waking up one night and dreaming of the Churel, the demon woman that is portrayed in the film. So she was writing about the myth, and then the idea behind her, was this first draft of the 2 pages that she wrote, and she completed the rest of the story after returning from a trip from Calcutta, after seeing a bulbul make her nest outside her house. And I didn't know that, but a bulbul is actually a songbird which is found across most of Africa and into the Middle East. And again, that makes a lot more sense when you put it in context like this. So she intended the story to resemble a fairy tale, and set it in the neoclassical era of Bengal to fulfill that. She was massively inspired by Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Bengali poet, writer, playwright, a composer, and a philosopher during the age of Bengal Renaissance, which is when the film is being set. So again, drawing those parallels here are very important. And actually, the premise of the film has similarities with one of Tagore's stories, novella Nastanir, which was adapted in 1964 in the film Charulata, and which will be one of my recommendations. Spoiler, but if you're interested in the cinema, then that's kind of a very classic one. And actually, when you watch 2 films back to back, you're kind of like, you can definitely see where the inspiration come from.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's amazing. And to be a first feature as well. That's fantastic.
Incredible, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think again, it just shows that these opportunities matter, because there's people who historically and even to this day, aren't getting opportunities to make films and to make features and to have backing from people like Netflix. So, and it shows what happens when they do. Like, these really beautiful, important films can be made that speak to, although it is very, I think, culturally specific, particularly in terms of like the sort of demon woman that we're talking about, but the themes within that about, what it means to be a woman and what it's like to be a woman are still are global, aren't they? Everyone
Absolutely.
can relate to that. So that's what's so important as well. So yeah, I mean, I would hope that people would have watched it before they listened to this. But if you haven't, then, because there are spoilers.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you haven't, now's your chance to stop the discussion and then come back to it after that.
I also think, we will talk about it when we get to it, but I would say as well, if people are listening to this and maybe are going to go and watch it, just as a bit of a warning about the sort of sexual violence in it, which is not gratuitous, but when it's used, it is to great effect, I think.
Absolutely.
And I would say, like, if that, I mean, I think it gives you a warning on Netflix anyway, but I think if that's something that people find difficult, there might be a bit you need to fast forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
yeah, two specific scenes that are very, really, really difficult to watch. But is that we will talk about it when we get to it.
But yes, so let's dive then. Let's dive into this beautiful. I mean, the first thing I thought were it was just so opulent and beautiful and colourful, and so
the richness of the colour, right?
Just so vibrant and so which I suppose, and this is a horror. You know, not maybe as horrifying as some other things, but it is a horror film. But that's what I loved about it as well. I was like, God, so much colour and like vibrancy.
Yes, exactly. Which is quite rare that this colour palette for a it's kind of a dark fairy tale, but with a really rich colour palette.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we love.
And so we see and Bulbbul. I'm not sure how old she's supposed to be, but she's very tiny.
5 years old.
Is she 5? Yeah. So she's all done up in a like wedding clothes. And her auntie's talking to her. I thought it was so sad, but really as an opening sort of scene to really contextualize the rest of the film. So she's putting a jewelry on, and she says, they make you wear toe rings to stop you flying away, which makes sense if Bulbbul is a bird like that. That
yes,
makes
exactly.
Sense.
Yeah.
And saying about like there's a nerve there and it's to control you, and then as she's carrying it at party, she's like, "What's control? What's that?"
Control?
And
what
it's
does it mean?
so sad.
It is heartbreaking. I do like the fact that as the film opens, I mean, there is a real emphasis on her feet, straight away. Yeah. And as we know, that's going to take a big part of the film. Not in an only fan way, just if you have someone who hasn't seen the
It's not that sort of film.
It's not that sort of film, no. But I do like that immediately, and as you said, when she puts those toe rings on her and says, there's a nerve right here that stops you from flying away. And, she's trying to be playful with her, but then you can see the sadness wash over her, and she doesn't want to lie to this kid. And even though the kid obviously doesn't have any way of really understanding what that actually means. What is control? Well, we're about to find out.
Well, we're about to find out, and that's the thing. And she's so tiny as well. I mean, she obviously, because she's 5, but she's just this tiny, this little girl, and she's been sent away, and that's so sad. So she's been married off, and she goes away, and we see this journey through these woods, and she's been like taken from a family to a new family, this idea that she's supposed to just incorporate into this new family, and then we see this idea about this woman, don't we? That's first time we get this idea that she's lurking there with her feet turned backwards.
That's right.
And this journey through the deep dark woods, which again is very fairy tale, isn't it? It's very Little Red Riding Hood.
Even her, so after the wedding scene, she wakes up in this horse carriage in the middle of nowhere, and you get the idea that she must have fallen asleep at some point in the party, like a 5-year-old would do, and then wakes up, and her family is gone and she's been whisked away, and at this stage, you still, and that little boy is across her, they're the same age, and you can see, he looking after her, and you kind of think, maybe things are going to be okay for her,
yeah, we're like, oh, this is, and then we move into sort of present day a little bit, don't we? We sort of see this like jump forward but first we understand. Do we understand there? Yes. So first we understand that when she gets there, she's like, "Where's my husband?" And she thinks she's been married to this boy who's her age, but she's actually been married to this guy who's about, I don't know, how old he's supposed to be, in his 30s at least. I mean, he's
her age.
He's a grown man, and she's a little 5-year-old girl.
And we're also being introduced to his brother, who, is kind of presented as, as mentally challenged.
Yeah,
I don't know how to. Yeah, I don't like how should we?
I don't really know how to frame it, and that was my only issue really with film. I didn't feel that he needed to be presented in that way.
Absolutely.
And I felt that, I mean, we'll see, more about his character and how that like, I suppose, shapes Bulbbul's story arc. But I felt that it were a very unnecessary factor in his presentation.
I didn't think this character needed to. Either the character didn't need to be there, or he definitely didn't need to be involved in that story arc, because it would have made more sense to have the husband being the instigator of all those things that happened to her, basically. So that's
and I think
that's crass.
Yeah, it was crass, and I think for a film that is presenting really men's violence and where that women endure it, I think to bring in and to demonize another group that is often abused and marginalized, people with disabilities, either physical or, whatever. I felt like that were demonizing a group that really didn't deserve it.
Exactly, because unfortunately she, by doing this, is like discrediting almost the point that she's making. I mean, I know we're jumping,
we're massively
in the film here. And we will talk about it more when we get there. But it is important that you set it up from the start, because it's kind of difficult to understand the choices behind, the choice made behind this character. And as I understand it, that character is played by is the same actor that plays the husband.
Oh, is it?
I think so.
Now you say it. Yeah, exactly. Actually.
I didn't pick up on that until the second time I watched it, actually, and I was just like, this is such a strange choice. And also to depict him, and I'm really sorry for using the term mentally challenged, because I don't think it's the right, it's not the right way to describe it. It's more that he's a child, right? In his head. So to have the two children, Bulbbul and Satya, when they're children, representing that magic and innocence of childhood, and then to have a grown-up character who is a child in his head, but he's violent and and unpredictable. It just doesn't make sense. It's kind of like those two things are at odds completely. So it
made me very uncomfortable, because I think it's a very stereotypical representation of someone who might have some sort of disability in a way that is harmful, and we see that a lot, and there's been a lot of criticism about how that used to be done historically. You think about Rain Man, it's the first thing that comes to mind, isn't it? And it's
exactly.
And I think also then what it does, as you've said, is later on in film, it sort of invalidates the point about male violence, because you sort of, how much responsibility can we put on a person if you're saying that they're not it's a very uncomfortable thread in film for me that I felt were really unnecessary, and the same story could have been told without that element, and instead
unnecessary even in the sense that all the other men depicted in the story, nearly all the other men, have history of violence or excusing violence and stuff like this. So so therefore there really was no need for this. And I just don't understand it, how, that thread in the story just... it's just really problematic and makes the film... even though I said, we both said, we like the film, like the story, but it's, it definitely could have been written in a
It was a choice that could have been different. And I think it would have made it better if it had been a different choice, because you wouldn't have had this discomfort. Even discomfort of us trying to sort of put into words, because it's not even clear. So again, it's just that very generic, stereotypical... ableist representation of what someone thinks this looks like.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not even like we can articulate what this character's supposed to represent, because it's just this very generic, very harmful portrayal of it, which is why we're having so much difficulty trying to be sensitive, trying to word it in a way that's not offensive, but it's hard to put it even into words because we don't know,
because it is offensive. Exactly.
And so that is a problem with it. But what we see is that this character is obsessed with Bulbbul, is fixated on Bulbbul, and no one does anything to protect her, really. They just sort of shoo him away. They're like, go away, leave her, distract him.
There's no attempt to recognize exactly his obsession, his fixation on her. It's just a case of pushing him to the margins, basically. So again.
So in this moment, I suppose what it's doing is setting up that she's in a very unsafe environment, and she's married to a man at least 3 times her age, probably. Well, at least 3 times. More than that.
More than
Even
that,
more.
yeah.
My maths is off, but...
3 times time double.
She's married to a grown man, which is a common, or at least then were a very common thing that happened, and they're like a royal family, and I think she's come from quite a well-off family, but she's married well into
That's
this, a very highly esteemed family.
So therefore there is this expectation to keep quiet, and I think it's a theme that keeps coming back in the film, right?
Yeah, but we see that she's not safe in this environment. And then we sort of jump forward and we see it's 20 years later. So Bulbbul's obviously, she's an adult now, a stunning adult.
Oh my God, I know the actress is just incredible.
Absolutely
incredible.
Beautiful. Like, first time you see her, you're just like, oh my God, what a vision. She's absolutely, and all the way through, she looks, the sort of, the clothes that she's in, and there's all this beautiful embroidery on everything. I mean, the costume design is absolutely just fantastic. Again, for a first film, there's that attention to detail that really it's a world that she's built. It's a very rich world.
The imagery, the color, the color scheme. I think everything's been given such a great attention. So on top of the story, everything is aided by the way that this film looks. And actually, talking of this, before we are being introduced to grown-up Bulbbul, there is this scene where Satya is obviously coming back. He says it's 20 years later, and he's in a horse carriage, and he's being, he's traveling through that dense forest, and the whole forest is engulfed in that red mist.
Yeah,
and it's just really, again, it looks amazing. I mean, it gave me Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula vibe, right? It's like it's really, you feel like it's the same thing, and he doesn't understand why the driver is going through that forest so fast, and actually the driver goes on saying that the place isn't safe, that she lives here, that the demon woman, the churl, lives here, and obviously Satya laughs at this, being like, this is a stupid story, but from his point of view, he's coming back while he lives in the city, and he probably thinks all the villagers are hanging on to those folk stories.
Yeah, and then we see this mysterious woman, don't we, very briefly. And what I really love about her is, and obviously I'm going to deep dive into this in Folklore Corner, I got very excited, so it's very long this week. Apologies in advance, everyone. But she's got this really long dark hair that covers her face, and that's a central sort of feature of this figure. And I thought, like this idea about like perverse femininity. Like she's like perverting what it means to be feminine and to be womanly, because she's obviously this thing we're meant to fear, but she's a very stereotypically feminine like figure, and I just thought that were really interesting. And then we see that the sister-in-law is now like a nun. She's shaved her head. What the thing that did make me laugh, and not just this film, but a thing that people do in every film, is when someone's got hair and then they put like a bald cap on them, and they end up with this enormous like Megamind head. Because obviously they're just like building on top of his hair. It did distract me.
Like Coneheads, you remember that film?
Like Coneheads, that's exactly what it's like. But it's because her husband, who is this character that we've seen, who's had this obsession with Bulbbul, who is Bulbbul's brother-in-law, essentially, because he's her husband's brother. He has been killed, which is one of the reasons I think that Satya's come back, because Bulbbul's husband's disappeared, and we're not sure why at this point. He's gone. And so the sister-in-law's got this guilt that she was like immersed in prayer when her husband were killed. And this is, I think, first time we're introduced to Kali, isn't it? The goddess, that they were all praying to the goddess.
That's right.
And we see this amazing statue. It's absolutely incredible. Sort of like very brief sequence of like, really rapturous celebration and prayer. But that's what she was doing when her husband died. And so the sort of mysterious death. But what I liked about that is that Satya immediately is like, it's a man-eating tiger. There's a man-eating tiger, and I thought, because you hear so much of that in, I mean, obviously Rudyard Kipling is a problematic person, but obviously a lot of the stories that we grow up on are from Rudyard Kipling's visions of India, and there's always like a man-eating tiger that is lurking, and I just thought that were interesting as well, like so many myths to account for fears, like it must be a man-eating tiger that's just managed to get in and chomp him.
Yeah, in a very specific manner as well.
Yeah. Have I missed anything? I don't think I missed anything there, yeah?
No, that's the
we're
bolts of
rattling
it.
on.
That's fine, yeah.
So yeah, and then I suppose then we see that there's a very strange. So this film, what I really liked about this film is just coming off as well from attending a Gothic summer school. This is such a wonderful example of like modern Gothic, even though it's historical. But it is such a Gothic film. In all of its themes and its tropes, and so we start to see that with this jealous sister-in-law sort of lurking around, and she's in mourning for her husband, but really is she?
Yeah. There's definitely that thread of the evil stepsister, the meddling, and I mean just like it's very fairy tale and Gothic stories, like isn't it? Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because we get the perspective. So obviously Satya has been away for a long time. And so he's coming back into this, and so we sort of see this dynamic through his eyes, like what's going on between Bulbbul and her sister-in-law, and
but there is a readiness for him a readiness, not rather. I mean, he's so biased, I think, in his vision of what's happened. And when she challenges him, saying, "I haven't heard from you in the last 5 years," and he says, "Well, I've written to your husband." And he never responds, and he just accepts this. It's kind of like it's part of the way things are. And he doesn't. We see in all the flashbacks the friendship and the love that nurtured, that was born between them, and the bond that was created between them. But it's very obvious that he meant a lot more to Bulbbul than he meant to him, because at the first sign, then he was happy to leave, and thinking he pick things up when things when he's back. Basically, there's no sense of urgency and what her life might be when once he leaves, once he abandons her.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that keeps coming back up, is it's like he's expected her to just hang on and hook till he comes back.
Yes, exactly.
That she's the same person, because that's one of the things he says to her is like, "Where did the good little lady I knew disappear to?" And she says, "I gobbled her up."
I know, and I just love. I mean, there's I read an interview with the filmmaker where someone was asking her about the predictability of the story, because from an audience point of view, it's like it's like it's obvious that it's her, like the way she looks, the way she looks at him, the way she keeps dropping those hints. It's kind of like come on, like put two and two together. But I think it does make sense that and she was saying that she doesn't mind that, she didn't mind that, but she was like she also wanted the audience to be like, but those characters are so ready to believe their own version of the truth that it wouldn't even occur to Satya that she could have become, something terrible could have happened to her, that she could have become a different person, that she could evolve, because it's not the role of a woman. The role of a woman is to stay constant. And so he's kind of like, he's come back to this person that he absolutely doesn't recognize, but he doesn't question that it is as the result of all this, violence and trauma. For him, it's just kind of like, oh, you're being disobedient, and you must have driven your husband away.
Yeah, and also, oh, you're not veiled. You're not even veiled. This doctor, because when he sees her talking to doctor, and this doctor becomes a key figure, and he's like, you're not even veiled when you're talking to this other man, and like
so disrespectful.
She's not conforming to what he thinks she should be, even though he's not been there for 5 years. He's got no idea who she is. But that idea about the woman should be constant, I think, is really interesting, that women aren't allowed the space and the capacity to evolve. They can't be changed. They stay the same, and we're all comfortable with who they are.
Exactly, and the fact that he doesn't question the fact that her husband has left, and God knows how long he's gone.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, when she's looking after the affairs of the estate, and he takes the piss out of her at some point. He says, are you playing at Lady of the Manor or something like this, as if it wasn't she wasn't it wasn't her responsibility to do it. It's like everybody's left her to deal with whatever has to be dealt with, and and yet she's being criticized for doing exactly that. And even there's a scene, I think the first scene where when he goes and meet her after he arrives that evening and she's asleep, or he's been told she's asleep, and the next morning he finds her in counsel with the driver that drove him the night before, saying that he wants to leave his wife. And she says, what's going to happen to your wife? And he's like, oh, well, she'll leave, she'll, I don't know, he doesn't care, but he's kind of like, well, I want to marry a new wife and blah, this and that. And Bulbbul says to him, nothing bad should happen to her, otherwise you'll pay the consequences. And that's where Satya is like, what do you think you are, lady of the manor? Like not even disputing the fact, not even realizing, what is happening in front of him. It's kind of like, well, it's her husband talking about his wife. And, it's like, of course he's right. He's the man. There's never any
right. Exactly. And he's like, oh, they'll live together like sisters, and wife's face is like, no, we fucking won't.
Yeah. Exactly. What world?
Off. What? Where's my second husband? And I think we see that in Satya throughout. So there's that when he's like, oh, you think that you're a person who can make these decisions, but then when she's speaking to the doctor and they're talking about he's been treating another woman who she's like got broken bones, and she says like, oh, her husband said she fell downstairs, and he's like, well, maybe she did, and she's like, there's only one house in this village with stairs and you're in it. And he's so ready to just look away and be complicit in his silence with violence, and she sees him, and I think that's a big part of his sort of disgust towards her, is that this love that she had for him, this really deep feeling is gone, and the sort of the rose tinted glasses have come off, and she sees him for what he is, which is a weak, complicit man who's and he don't like to be seen like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was a very, we were talking about the writing of the story, and how some elements could have been taken out to allow for a better story, but I thought this was a very interesting development, the fact that those children were so close and shared the same vision of stuff, but that he's become something completely different, and that with her awakening as such, which is a terrible phrase to use in light of what happens to her, but that she is able to see right through him, like he's not the savior. And I think when they are children and you see this bond developing between them, he's set up as being he's gonna be the savior, but he's not. He's the one who left. Yeah. And he comes back and expecting to find things exactly as they were, and it's I did really appreciate that.
Well, it's that thing of him thinking that he's a good man because he's not, maybe not hitting women.
Yes.
And he's not married, so he's not abusing his wife. But he is absolutely complicit in the systems and willingly upholds the systems that keep women in that. So it's that, the sort of complicity of silence, of looking away, of accepting a man who says, oh, my wife fell downstairs, and, even though it's so obvious that's not possible. Exactly. That's not what's happened.
It's the culture of keep quiet, as we kept, that is, mentioned between the women, but it's actually the same thing, amongst men. They're just like, well, I don't, I would never beat up my wife, but I definitely am not going to say anything about my neighbor who's beating up his wife. It's his wife. He does,
It's his business. And also that he benefits. So it's again that, and we've talked about it in relation to other films as well, but that idea that men, all men benefit from violence. All men benefit from domestic violence, from sexual violence, from patriarchy, and so are willing to be complicit in upholding the status quo because they benefit from it. And that's not a way that men who think that, by doing bare minimum, which is not punching women, really, that's like the very bare minimum you can expect from someone, that somehow they're not part of the problem, they're part of the solution. But while ever you're complicit in your silence, you're part of the problem. That's and she is very it's the way that she sees that about him, and she's always mocking him. She's always got like a smirk on her face when she talks to him, because she don't respect him. You can see that there's like no respect there.
She's really defiant. She's always holding his gaze, right? Like, you know, like, I dare you, motherfucker. Like,
what are you going to do to me?
Say
like,
one more thing.
Yeah. And she's really got that energy about her, and you don't know what to do with that, which is why he keeps going, oh, why aren't you this good girl that you were when I left? Oh, you're so different. Why are you not this, this really good, well-behaved, like, quiet girl that I left behind? It's like, fuck you, guy. So, after we've had this established power struggle between Satya and Bulbbul, Satya decides that obviously he's the man. He has returned. Don't you worry, sister-in-law, he keeps saying. I will take all these responsibilities off your plate. You just worry about sitting around and looking nice. And he decides as part of this that he's going to hunt this woman, this demon woman who is tormenting the male villagers. And what I think, again, so this mist, it plays with colour, and like the moon and the mist, very gothic, very, like I said, very Dracula. So he gathers up the only men who'll go because most of them are terrified. I mean, what a paradise.
I know, like that, and I like the fact that it's a red mist as well, you know, which is very associated with, you know, rage, but also women, you know, menstruation and all that.
It's a menstrual mist.
Menstrual mist. I love that. Trademark.
Tote bag, menstrual mist.
Sounds like a fantastic fragrance. A Monstrous fresh fragrance, menstruation mist.
That's it. We're developing this product line all the time. But yeah, so they all go into woods, and then we just see, what I really like is we just see sort of some hands and like some legs through the mist. Very sinister.
I know, yeah. Disembodied, yeah.
Yeah, just creeping towards. But she chases down this man, and fortunately kills him. I mean, we're all on the side of Bulbbul in this, and the demon woman in this film. And we find out afterwards that it is this man who they'd been talking about. Oh, it's his wife.
Exactly.
Who is now...
The one who fell down the stairs.
Yeah, the woman who fell down the stairs, and he is now dead and hanging from a tree. So this... again, Satya still don't believe that he becomes very convinced that it must be a man.
Yes, and not just a man. It's not just a man. He starts to suspect the doctor, right? Because he found the doctor and Bulbbul outside, and he's looking at her feet, and he doesn't understand. Like, that is just so inappropriate. You know, this doctor is touching his brother's wife's feet, and how can that be? She's not even veiled. Oh, this and that. And obviously, so he starts suspecting him because that doctor just seems very, like very sure of himself, and he's kind of, like he knows what's what, and he's very comfortable, around the place, and he's not intimidated by him. So you start thinking, this guy is looking guilty.
Yeah,
guilty.
I feel a certain kind of way about this man, and it can't be that I'm jealous and insecure. It must be that he's a serial killer. This must be what's happening. And then we saw. I mean, what I think it does really well is we're sort of seeing this present day, but it's sort of unraveling story in flashbacks. And I know sometimes people are like, oh God, not flashbacks. But I think how they do it in this film is it works really well because it's building up this story for us to see.
Exactly, it drip feeds the information. Even though, as we talked about, there is a certain... kind of from the part of the audience, we're kind of like, I'm, 99% certain that, I know what's happening, but we don't know what's happened. So that's, it's kind of really building up her story rather than like building up it's not a whodunit, it's a how has it been done, right?
Yeah. And this is it, yeah, absolutely. And this is the sort of, so we see sister-in-law is like, oh, look at all this beautiful jewellery that's come. And she's like, I don't give a shit about that. And then she says, your toe rings are getting a bit loose. So we get this reference back again to this, like the chain that is holding her down. And, she don't care about jewellery. She don't care what people think. She just wants to write her stories and hang out with Satya and just have this really,
She's a teenager.
She's a teenager. So she don't want to, she's not interested in sitting around and looking at jewelry, and it's not who she is. And so we see that, you know, throughout her life from being 5 years old in this environment, there's been this constant pressure on her to conform, to be a good wife, to be what she's supposed to be, that she's always pushed back against, but in a much more gentle way as a teenager. So she's defiant, but she's not it's not aggressively
she's very
defiant.
meek. Exactly, she has no real reason to be aggressively defiant. I mean, she does have reason, obviously, but she doesn't, you know, she's quite obedient, but she also wants to be able to do the things she wants to do, and she doesn't see a reason why, you know, she's not doing anything wrong. She's not doing anything wrong.
So we start to see that, you know, that all is not rosy and happy in this environment, but again, so I think this is when we see as well that she, they're all sitting around sort of having a picnic. It all looks very nice, and she's on this swing, and then a brother-in-law comes and sort of grabs hold of her, like grabs her. She's got really long,
like she's a doll, basically. She just wants to play with her.
Yeah, and that's what he keeps saying, like, "Oh, you're a doll, like play with me." And he sort of grabs hold of her by her hair. And again, it's just like, oh, come away, leave him, you know, come on. No real way no attempt to address that this is, you know, a threat. It's just like, well, this is what we, you know, this is how we deal with it. We just ignore him.
Yes, exactly. It's for you to work around this rather than, you know.
And he sulks and he's upset, but, you know, we've just got to live with it. And this is when we see in this that she is living. I mean, there's never really any discussion about her relationship with her husband, whether it's sexual or not.
I assume, it's kind of assumed that it's not, but it's, you know, in the sense that he's grooming her until the time is right, right? Yeah. I mean, that's how I read it. So.
Yeah, that she's, because I'm not sure how old she's supposed to be when we see her as a teenager. It don't really say if she's like...
No.
Because obviously it's the same actress, but obviously she looks younger. But it's not clear. But I got that vibe that it had not... That's what she's been groomed towards, that eventually you're going to be his wife in all ways, but at this point she's just very much like, they sit together and she pours him tea, and you know,
because there is a suggestion. There is a flashback earlier where we see her and Satya as little kids when they're 5-6 years old, talking about the churel, you know, making up these you know, these stories about that demon woman, and they are interrupted by Binodini, the sister-in-law, who says, you know, your husband wants to see you, and I don't understand why, because I'm the one who takes care of him. But, you know, he still wants his Bulbbul. So, you know, there is this suggestion that, you know, she's, you know, this little kid is being, brought up to be his wife in every way, like you've said. So I think at this point, when we see her on that scene with the swing, then there is still, she's still, you know, young enough that's you know, nothing, you know, that he hasn't.
Yeah, and I think, and we see that obviously that this builds up in these flashbacks, that this sister-in-law, her jealousy comes from the fact that she has been sleeping with Bulbbul's husband,
and she feels like she should be, because obviously he's the lord of the manor. And she thinks, you know, she's been married to his brother, but clearly she feels like she, you know, deserves the top spot.
Yeah, she's been slighted. She should.
Exactly.
And there's a bit where she says, "Oh, madam, don't you think?" And so we're playing with the politics as well of, and he gets really annoyed and he's like, "Madam, who are you talking to?" She's like, "Oh, sorry, my lady, I'm sorry." And she's like, forgets herself. She thinks she can sort of bully Bulbbul, really. That's what she's doing. She's making snide remarks, and it's all, which I honestly think that, you know, Bulbbul's probably happy that she's taking him off her hands.
Absolutely,
I don't think she'd be bothered.
In a way, I mean, it's, you know, again, like those politics, you know, relationship politics, and, you know, it makes you realize how, you know, this woman is, you know, is one of the greater victim in that story as well, because, you know, whereas, you know, Bulbbul character's arc is, you know, so traumatic, but, you know, she ends up being that, you know, figure of power, and, you know, and everything that goes, you know, that goes after that. You know, you can see that she's been probably going through exactly the same things, this, you know, this woman, her sister-in-law, sorry, and but then, you know, it's been so ingrained in her to keep quiet, you know, that she's very it's like that she's part of that of that system, so of that patriarchal oppression so badly that she can't even see it. She plays that game because she she feels like for all the things that I've endured, I should be I should be retributed in some way.
Yeah, she feels that she's been slighted, that she should have been the lady instead of being married to this. We assume this is an array. Well, it will have been, because that's what that particularly. I mean, it still happens in sort of these royal. I mean, I'm not a royalist. I don't claim to know how it all works, but this idea about arranged marriages and marriages of like convenience that strengthen alliances and all that stuff. So. She's been married off to this character who we've already mentioned. It's a bit of an uncomfortable portrayal, but we know that he is. We assume he's violent not only to Bulbbul but to her as well, and she's like sort of managing that. She's obviously sleeping with her brother-in-law, so he's using her for sex, but he's got no respect for her, and so she's sort of playing his wife, but he makes her sit in deference to his actual wife, his proper wife, who is so much younger than she is, and she's so there's all that tension there as well. And I think, like you say about she internalized misogyny, she is an excellent character that displays what that looks like.
Yes,
the woman who has internalized that and who can't. Well, I think you could argue that any woman who is a sort of figurehead for patriarchy and who opposes them systems, it's not necessarily that they can't see that it's harmful, but it's more that there's the fear of what rebelling against it would do.
Exactly, and I think because instead of seeing Bulbbul as an ally and as being like we are two women in the same situation, she sees her as an enemy. So she looks at that young woman and think, well, hang on, I'm the one who has all the responsibilities, as such, and and you're the one running around having being having this strong relationship with the brother, and you have the best of every world, basically. You being idolized by your husband, and yet you are that's it. Like the misogyny is so internalized that in her head she's kind of like you running around, and he doesn't see any of it, and you're making a fool of him, and you're making a fool of me by extension. And can't see past. Can't see past that to see that actually she's just a kid who is in a situation she don't understand. And I think, the historical context comes into play in that as well, because people were married off a lot earlier and women didn't have any agency or choice in that. And, there's like an historical and a cultural context to take into account in this story as well, that I think is important. But even like the fact that when their husbands die, they have to shave their head and basically become a nun, whereas I'm sure men, when their wives die, just get married again. Exactly.
It's even that, even in the way that women are expected to constantly deny their own wants and desires and agency and just conform to this structure, which is your family chooses your husband, you get married, you have children, that's your job, but then when he dies you're not a person anymore.
Yes,
because you're a widow now. You are so you go from being, and a lot of people have talked about this in, I'm sure, a much more eloquent way than me, but you go from being a man's daughter to a man's wife to a man's widow, and that's all you ever are.
Exactly.
And that trajectory we see in her character, that she goes from being a man's wife who she don't love, she don't want to be married to him, and then he dies, and then she's still tied to him even when he's dead. She's never free from him, and she is a sad character as much as she's a very unpleasant character at times. I think, like you say, it needs to be looked at through that lens of choice, of agency, rather than just, she's the villain because
exactly. And as we can see as well in the present day, when she is when she's been when she's not institutionalized, that's not the right point, but that's not the right word. But I mean, she shaved her head and she's, become a nun, basically. And she's, her demeanor has completely changed. She's, she carries a lot of guilt, and like, and that's really, really obvious. And there's a point where Satya is questioning her about, who's the doctor, like how often does he visit, and she's very unwilling to share any information. Whereas we've seen in flashback, she was the one feeding information and planting seeds. But in the present day, she's very much like, don't fucking ask me. Like I don't know. Like I haven't seen anything. I don't know anything. And then when Bulbbul comes into the room after that, and she says, "Oh, he was questioning me about the doctor, but I haven't said anything. It's not. You know me. I would never." And Bulbbul laughs at her, being kind of like, "Wouldn't you?
Wouldn't you?"
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting how that dynamic shifts.
Exactly.
And but then like we see again, so then I suppose we sort of flash back for a bit longer to really see this story arc for Bulbbul. But it's so a sister-in-law's been dripping poison into her husband's ear about, and I'm sorry I don't know the names, I'm terrible, we all know it.
So the husband is Indranil?
Indranil,
yeah.
But she's been dripping in about, she spends all this time with Satya, she loves him, she can't be apart from him. So he decides he's going to send Satya away, he's going to go to London to study law, which were a thing that people did then, a very common thing. And I think what I thought were interesting about it is that Bulbbul is devastated, but I don't think it's a romantic devastation. I think it's just that she's going to lose her only friend. So she's in an house surrounded by people so much older than her, and her only friend, her only peer, is Satya.
That's exactly it.
And they spend time together, they write ghost stories. So he writes a bit, she writes a bit, and he says, like, why do you always put ghosts in it? Like, why? So she's a spooky girl, so we like her. But she's going to lose this friend, and she's really, really devastated about it. And her husband just continues to grow more incensed because she's upset. But again, there's no recognition of the fact that this brother-in-law is her brother at this point. She's grown up with him from being 5. They've spent every day together. They've grown up together. And she's isolated in this big house on her own, and he's not going to be there anymore. And she, there's no... Again, it's that idea that women endure, isn't it? You're just supposed to endure it. Whatever happens, you just keep your mouth shut and you just keep going, and you don't inconvenience people with your emotions, and So he's sent away, and we're seeing this. This is when you really see this beautiful, like, gothic drama come out. They're in this big house full of secrets, and at one point, a sister-in-law says, "Large manners have large secrets," and there's this jealousy. And someone's sent away, and it's all this sweeping.
But it's such an interesting point that you bring up, the fact that actually her relationship with Satya wasn't, it wasn't a romantic relationship. It was, as you said, they grew up to be brother and sister, and and they both had the same creative outlet. They love writing together, and you can see that he breaks her heart to when he's being sent away, and she's like, how we're never going to be able to finish the story together, and. And then she ends up, ripping the pages of this story they wrote together and throwing that in the fire. And because of the poison that the sister-in-law has been feeding the husband, then he finds this little piece of paper in the embers of the fire saying Satya and Bulbbul, and of course he assumes that it's a love letter, it's a love note, and and that's what sends him, and it's just so cruel.
It's so cruel, and I think because you see her, she's devastated when he leaves, and she's crying, and she's like watching out at window, and we see that she's going back to window for days and days, and we assume because it does it really well, like her clothes are different. And she's like going to window, she's watching for him. And then, but yeah, she burns this book because she's so devastated. But it had said Satya, whatever his surname is, and Mrs. Bulbbul, whatever it's, again, I'm rubbish with names. But it had said very clearly demarcated their relationship. But because he just sees this scrap, and because sister-in-law's been dripping this poison, and because Bulbbul's so upset, he's obviously convinced that it's, she loves him. Yeah, she loves Satya, and she don't love him. And to be fair, she probably don't love him.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who can expect it? Again, the audacity of men. Who can expect that she'd love him? I mean, we see that he's being very kind to her in a very paternal way. That we see, it's a very paternal sort of. he looks after her, and he wants her to have everything she wants, and she's got her own room, she's got her own, but it's not. But his jealousy then just turns into this rage, which is when we get what I think is the hardest bit of the film to watch. So, content warning: we are going to be talking about domestic and sexual violence for a couple of minutes. So skip forward, I would say, if you don't like it. Absolutely. I mean, if you don't like it, it's a weird thing to say. I don't think.
No, exactly.
Likes
yeah.
That were a weird. Sorry,
like
we don't like it. I don't mean we like it. Just we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's really shocking actually, because it is such a massive departure from how he's been for the rest of the film. So he has been very kind and very, very gentle with her. But he goes looking for her, and he sees these embers in fire, and he picks up a poker up, and she's in bath, and he drags her out of bath, and he beats her with his poker.
The shot of him walking down that corridor with that metal rod, and you just know what's going to happen, and it's just it's absolutely horrendous. I've got a quote from the filmmaker actually about it, because I think a lot of the criticism about the film, in some of the criticism about the film, was those scenes, these scenes, these two scenes that we're discussing, and why. Because people were kind of like, you don't have to show the abuse, basically, But so she said, why was it written? Because I wanted to take my character through the extremes of male violence, to break her down completely before I equip her to rise again. And why was it written the way that it was? I don't want to show what is being done. I want to show what it is doing to her. I don't want to cut away from it to something that dilutes her pain. In both those scenes, you see something breaking inside of her. There's the physical part of it, and then there's the spirit that's destroyed. And I thought that was... it's her justification, and, everybody is entitled to feel how they want about those things. But one thing that I thought rewatching it the second time is that indeed it's not focusing on, what is being done to her. It is very framed as, as the reaction that she has to those abuse. And I think that's a very interesting distinction to make. Yeah.
And what I would say is, as someone who has been very vocal about not liking, seeing sexual violence and things in films, I think what I don't like is seeing sexual violence from a male standpoint.
Yes.
The male gaze of sexual violence. And I think what this does is, because, she's in bath. Why is she in bath? Well, because she's vulnerable. She's in a place of safety. You never see anything. You never see. No. So I feel like if a male director had done that, and this is not necessarily how every male director would have done it, but when we've seen sexual violence in films previously, we'd have seen everything. She'd have been naked. We'd have had, because I think, so that this I think is a really interesting point, and one that actually I think has really crystallized for me what my problem is, which is fantastic, always good to know, is that, so we see that we know that he's hitting her. It's not very, it's graphic, but it's not gratuitous. But then we very much see her face, and it's very much on her face, and this disbelief, this absolute shock of what is happening? Why is this happening? And I think the difference is that when in other examples that have shown sexual violence, it is because there's this male gaze, it's very much the violence on the body, whereas this is the violence on the spirit, which is what that director is saying. It is the violence on her spirit, on her as a person, not her as a body that exists for violence to be perpetrated on. And when we have very graphic scenes where, for me, if someone's been, we talked about it in... Friday the 13th, where they made her walk through woods and she's totally naked? I think that was Friday the 13th, weren't it? And that, again, were like, oh, we want to show she's vulnerable. Well, show she's vulnerable by showing her face. That's You're not showing she's vulnerable. You're showing a vulnerable body because that excites this misogynist.
Yeah, because it's male gazing. Exactly. Yeah.
That excites the misogynist patriarchal gaze to see vulnerable women frightened. That's a big part of what patriarchy is. But in this, although she's in a vulnerable position, we aren't given I don't want to even say opportunity, but I suppose the opportunity to see her vulnerability in her body. We see it in her face, which then it can't be diluted, because you are just focused on her face. And I think the way that were done were necessary to tell this story. And sometimes it is necessary to see things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that's you've said it so eloquently.
Oh, thank you.
But it's exactly that, and I heard critics about it and being like, what, we don't need to see this, but I was like, but that's the point. We don't see, we just see how it's breaking her spirit, and this is essential for that particular story to understand this in order to to understand the rest. And so I thought it was, and this the same with the subsequent scene. I think that was done exactly the same way. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but
it's horrible.
It is necessary to see uncomfortable things sometimes,
and it is. And we so then the subsequent scene we see is that he's beat her really badly and he's really damaged her feet. Which is so
it's horrible, and the shot of her feet in those
the
hanging,
sling,
exactly, and it's just, and the realization on her face that she's like, I'll never walk again, basically. You think it's never
she thinks she'll never walk again. She's in agony. I mean, he's really the but this again, I think what this shows is so the way that people justify domestic violence is that he lost control of himself. Well, he didn't lose control with Satya. He didn't beat Satya.
Absolutely. It was very premeditated.
And this is thing, like people like that, men like that, don't lose control at the jobs. They don't lose control with a friend. They just happen to lose control in a very specific environment with a very particular person.
Precisely.
And that's what he's done. And like by doing that to her feet, he's made it so she can't run away. So again, this idea we're coming back all the time to her feet, which is obviously integral to the sort of the folklore. But the way that he's deliberately maimed her so that she can't get away from him is so cruel, so unbelievably cruel.
Yeah, and it's even more so that he does that to stop her from running away, to stop her from going anywhere, really. Not even just running away. And then the scene after that, directly after that, is the one leaving.
He leaves.
So he does that, incapacitating her, but being kind of like, but this is your punishment for something that I invented in my head.
And the fact that he leaves because he's so ashamed. Well, you're leaving her here, can't look at what he's done, can't face the consequence. But we see that she's totally incapacitated. She's got both feet in a sling. Doctor comes and he sort of, he's very clear she can't be touched, she can't be moved. She's got to rest it. We've got to try and she's got like braces on her ankles to try and hopefully get her.
Sorry. I've just literally thought as we were talking as well that when he leaves because he's so ashamed of what he's done, and the doctor appears, saying she's still unconscious, but she's, hopefully I've done what I could, and he said, what happened, and her husband says she fell down the stairs, and such at the beginning of the film, when she mentioned that, and she says there's only one set of stairs in this house. It's like. It's like, don't fucking use this bullshit on me, basically, when it's been used on me already.
And there's, and there's absolutely no way that would happen falling downstairs.
Yeah, exactly.
But so she's, and it is a really awful, to be fair, it is a very horrible, uncomfortable scene, but she can't move, and this creepy, horrible brother-in-law who's been stalking her her entire life comes in. And there's all like bells and things hung up, and he's sort of messing with these, and then he starts
pulling on the strings,
and she's screaming, and then
the pain is horrible.
The pain of it, the pain of it, and the fact that she's so vulnerable, she can't move, she can't leave, and I think the thing as well is that she's screaming at top of her voice, and I don't believe that sister-in-law wouldn't have heard that, really. I don't believe that. But no one comes to save her anyway, and he rapes her in a way that, again, although it were graphic, not gratuitous, I think that's the sort of main thing I would say. It's graphic because, like the director said, this is something that women are facing every day, and when we go, well, we just cut away to
like we know what's happening. You don't need to see
what's
it,
happening.
We don't. So
we don't really. We see again, the impact of it on her, which is awful. I mean, it's a really uncomfortable scene. But again, it don't go on. It's not like a protracted, I spit on your grave, 45-minute scene. It's just, but it is brutal and it's uncomfortable and it's hard to watch. And,
and again, I think most of the shots are exactly her reaction, what he's doing to her, shots of her feet, you see the bandages, filling up with blood, and it's just, I mean, it is, it's absolutely horrendous to watch, and we're right to say, that, a lot of people, have to fast forward it, but like you said, it is not, I don't think it's gratuitous.
No, and it's, it's, it is difficult, and I think if people do have that, I would say fast forward it, but I think that I totally understand where director's coming from. But so this happens and she dies. He suffocates her because he's got his hand over her mouth and she dies. So he's then, oh no, again, shame, these men and the shame. Don't do the thing that makes you ashamed. That's what I would say, But he runs back to his room at sister-in-law. He's like, what have you done? And she can tell that what he's done.
Which again is, sorry, in terms of his representation, I thought this was, so, this is why it's really badly handled as well, because the whole film has been like, you're, like, oh, dull, and, he wants to, he handles her like she doesn't, she shouldn't have any reaction, basically, but he's very well aware of what, in that moment, it's kind of like he's very well of what he's done. And so, it just is, it's just such a problematic portrayal through and through. And it really shouldn't have been this character. Like, I still maintain, like, it could have just been the husband that would have been. It
could have been husband, or it could have been that the brother were like that and he would just.
Yes, exactly.
A creep, because, he was just a creep. I think adding that in adds a layer of, discrimination and ableism, and again perpetuates a very harmful stereotype about people, that they're dangerous and that they can't be trusted, and I just think it were unnecessary. But anyway, we see that she's dead, and he just leaves her there, and like you say, her bandages have all filled up with blood. But then the mist returns, the moon, the menstrual mist returns, and we see an eclipse and a blood moon, a blood red moon, and again this flash to Kali, the goddess, and then she sits up screaming, but
that shot is just
that's brilliant, because she's not screaming in fear anymore. She's screaming in rage. There's this rage scream. So, then we see Doctor comes back and he's like, "What's happened? I tell people not to touch these bandages," and he sees blood, blood on a thigh, and he's like, "What happened?" And she's a totally different. She's now the Bulbbul that we've seen in the present day. Very, very.
Yeah, she's no longer accepting to be vulnerable around other people, right? He's very much like, "Tell me what happens," and I'm a doctor, I can help. And she's like, "Well, if you're a doctor, just do your job and fuck off."
I don't need your help anymore.
Yes, exactly. And that comes on when the doctor comes in, it's just after the sister-in-law has, she just, wash off the blood, basically.
Missed that bit, sister-in-law, she's saying, it's really interesting. I made a note of what she was saying. So she's like, he's a little insane, but you'll be adorned in jewels. And he's a little insane, but you'll be draped in silks. And she's like, just keep quiet. And that's when she says, large manners have large secrets. And, she's like trying to convince her not to make a problem. You're the problem. This happens. Exactly. We all, the sort of, and again, you have to look at it from a contextualized standpoint about women and the rights that women definitely did not have then, violence, domestic violence, sexual violence were a problem like it is today. I mean, I'm not saying that society is any better really today at dealing with it, but then women, what would they do if she said, "Oh, my brother-in-law's just raped me"? well, that's his right because you're his property. You're his brother's property. You're not a human. You're not a person.
Yeah. First of all, you're a liar. They would say.
You're a liar. He hadn't done it. Or you've seduced him. You've obviously led him on. Or he couldn't have done it. He wouldn't have done it. But if he has done it, it's your fault. Basically.
Exactly. And I think this is what the sister-in-law is, implying in that moment, right? She's just like pretending, giving that false sense of normalcy. She's just kind of like, as you said, she's like, if you're, you have to, just live with it, but you'll have, you'll be adorned in riches and in jewels, and you'll see your life, your life will be so much better anyway. And if you talk about it, first of all, no one will believe you, and so that won't change anything. So she's just kind of like, just put it at the back of your mind, and just don't mention it, and don't mention that I was here as well. Okay, bye.
Yeah, leave me out in it. Don't bring me into it.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I think what's interesting about this with Satya is she never explicitly says to him, "This is what your brother did to me." She don't need to justify herself to him. I think that's what you see coming across, is that she don't need to say to him, "This happened," because what's he going to do about it? She don't need him to do any. There's nothing he can do. But
exactly, she doesn't rely on anyone else to enact revenge for her. And in fact, I think it's more that she waits for him to show his cards, right? Like because there's a point, I think, later on when she says, you're all the same," basically, where she's, when he accuses her of something, and she's kind of like, "Well, there you go. Not that I gave you the benefit of the doubt, but you show yourself for who you truly are, and I don't, So what would be the point of me telling you the truth?" Yeah,
and that's it. And it's the thing as well that, he wants to smoke with her. So he sees her smoking with Doctor, and then, that's obviously not a thing that a woman should be doing. But then he gives her one because he wants to break. It's like he wants to break rules with her, but then he wants to chastise her for doing it. And, he's like, "You fell under this doctor's spell." And he said, "You're forgetting right from wrong." It still can't. I mean, there's no indication that her and this doctor have got any sort of relationship besides a friendship.
Absolutely not. If anything, there is that scene where they share a smoke on the lake house or whatever, wherever that is. They do talk, like the doctor makes allusion to the fact that, he could very well be in love with her, but that he would never act on it because he's. I think because it's like she's seen some shit, basically.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, it's, my role is to protect her, not.
That's it. She's not interested in that, and But he says she abandons all shame and all that was good and true about her, and that's when she laughs at him, and he's accusing her, and she's like, "You've got no idea what truth is," and he wants her to admit that, like, "Oh, just admit you've been taken advantage of. Admit you're this poor fragile woman who a man has come and he's took advantage of you." And
we can still redeem you, even though it's all your fault. But
it's all your fault. But you're too stupid to have understood what you were doing, so we can redeem it. It's fine. And that's when we find out about the rape anyway, isn't it? That's when she says you're all the same and you don't know what you're talking about. And
exactly.
But then the Satya has become fixated on the fact that the doctor is the killer, that he's just for some reason been killing everybody. And so decides he's going to take him. He's taking him to Calcutta to be tried. And again in a carriage traveling through these woods. And he says the only way that I will believe you is if I see this demon woman for myself. At which point...
just you wait, exactly. But in the meantime, back at the mansion, Bulbbul and her sister-in-law are attending the prayer meet for the anniversary of the death of Mahendra, the brother. And Bulbbul says to her, "Oh yes, how could I have forgotten? It's such a special day for both of us."
Yeah, for both of us.
Was amazing. So when they're right.
I was just going to say, like, even though sister-in-law has, done what she's done, and she knows that but even then it's like, it's a special day for both of us because we both wanted him dead.
Exactly, that's exactly it. And I did really love that. Such a great, a great sentence of dialogue. But so when they arrive at the prayer meet rather. Bulbbul is ends up talking to a young man who tells her that he's the son of the driver, the horse carriage driver, and he shows her the body of a woman, basically saying that her father has thrown his mother out of the window because his new wife was jealous, basically. So he's decided to just murder her.
Oh, you see, I thought he said, oh, well, this is interesting, because I thought he said he threw my mother out of the house and this is what she's done, that she'd killed herself.
It could be that, actually. Yeah, sorry.
I thought she said he were crying, and then they went to river and he said this is calling back to the first time we see.
Sorry, it just made me laugh. Sorry, it made me laugh so much that I thought he threw her out of the window. Sorry, it's obviously it's so not funny in the context of this story.
But it just wanged her out a window. Have that, and she was like, so the husband that said, oh, they'll live like sisters and everything will be fine.
That's right.
It's been a matter of days, we assume, at this point. And new wife's obviously gone, I don't want your first wife here. So he throws her out and because again, if he threw her out, what was she going to do? Where was she supposed to go?
Exactly. She got nowhere to go, live in poverty, just die. Basically.
Yeah. So she drowns herself. And so then we see Satya and the doctor in this carriage, and then the carriage stops. And when he looks out, the driver is no more. And so that's when we get the sort of we see the mist, the menstrual mist, and we see Satya sees this shadowy shape with the backwards feet, which we've not really talked about, but we will in Folklore Corner. The main feature of this demon woman is that her feet are on backwards, and so he shoots into the mist, and then there's a bit of a chase around, and then the doctor gets out and sees the woman, and that's when we see, in a shock to no one,
but himself, although he doesn't seem that surprised, but you understand that it is Bulbbul, the witch, the demon, or the goddess, essentially
that Bulbbul is there, but she has been shot like in the hip. He did manage
but
to get her.
But she smiles as she
she smiles.
She's
so he says, oh, she's here, this demon. And Doctor said she's not a demon, she's a goddess, which is something that I will go into. Very excited. So then we get this chase through the woods, and then he's determined to find her. And so Satya decides the best thing to do is to just set the forest. Again, some men just want to watch the world burn.
Exactly. It's just kind of like, I'm just going to destroy everything because it's just what I do.
To get what I want, which is to find this person, I am going to just burn this forest to the ground. And there's a bit where the doctor tries to stop him from shooting, and he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, she's just a friend to me, but isn't she more than that to you? And obviously Satya's just consumed in his male
literally no idea
hunter thing and don't understand, and so we see, and I were ready to hate the ending. I've got to be honest, I was watching it like, you are kidding me, because we see that Bulbbul is like, she's sort of climbing into this tree, and she's just like sitting there, this forest burning,
being engulfed by the fire,
and she's engulfed by these flames, and Satya realizes then that it's Bulbbul, that this is he's basically murdered because he's set this forest on fire. So we see a bit of an after, like the sort of afterwards, the epilogue. Prologue's first, epilogue second. There we go. And with him talking to his brother in a letter and saying, "I've basically become you. I'm so full of shame. I've done this awful thing. I can't live with it. I'm leaving." And so the brother-in-law returns to the home that's now empty and sort of covered in, become overtaken by nature. You see all this. It's like a year later, and so. But I thought what were interesting is like she's consumed in these flames as he's consumed in his guilt. Like it finally dawns on him that this is his complicitness in this. But again, runs away.
I was going to say, but that was his response, is to fucking run away.
Don't want to help, just runs off.
He's like, I'm complicit, but I'd rather leave and for nobody else to know.
Oh, my shame is so painful for me. Oh no, I can't possibly face it. So he fucks off, and then the husband comes back, and I'm like, this is some bullshit.
I know. I was
bullshit.
so mad. I was kind of like, oh, so there is no justice. I thought, I was like, if this film ends like this, I'm going to be so fucking mad.
Yeah, I was sat there like, what fuckery is this? Are you kidding me? So I'm watching it anyway. Then he comes back and he's in his bed sleeping, just not a caring world. And then we hear his name whispered, and as he looks out of like embers and smoke,
she's come for
Bulbbul comes back and she smiles at him, and we fade to black.
The end.
The end.
That was brilliant. I did find it really interesting, and I you might mention that already in the folklore corner, but when he comes back at the end and the place is seemingly abandoned, I was reading about the long grass that is growing just outside the palace, cash pool, I think it's called, and it's apparently a really significant symbol of the Hindi goddess Durga, who is associated with protection, strength, motherhood, destruction, and wars. And apparently the blooming cash signify that the abandoned mansion is now actually the home of Bulbbul, and that in her rebirth she's become the divine feminine. So I was like, that is so that little symbolic at the end, which is kind of like, this, wonderful. But same as you, I was kind of like, until this scene where when I saw him sleeping, I was kind of like, no, okay, like this, we're going towards something good there. Men
like this don't sleep easy, not in Bulbbul's
exactly.
world. But I think it's interesting because we also we get a flashback that we've not really touched on when we find out that Bulbbul is the demon woman. Which is her going. So one of the men that dies, you see him and he's in a bath full of blood, and they say a child saw him, but she's in shock and she'll not talk. And we see at the end that this.
But interestingly, she said to the police officer, like, so Satya can't talk to her because she's been sedated by the doctor, which is, again, is like, oh, this fucking meddling doctor. But he's been told by the police officer that the little girl said she was rescued by the goddess.
Yeah. So we see that actually this poor little girl was in this bath with this sexual predator, and Bulbbul came and ripped his throat out and saved her from him, and so we see her kill all these men that we've only seen dead at this point, and we we see in a very satisfying flashback.
Absolutely.
I mean, I loved it. Kill your rapist. I'm all for that.
Exactly. She's like what's missing out of the Justice League. I think this bullshit superhero, but she's the superhero we need.
She is the superhero we need. And the one that we deserve.
Yeah, exactly. Not all heroes wear capes, but some of them have fucking fabulous hair.
Oh, yes, fabulous hair. But and I think it's interesting. We've talked a lot, I think, already about, the themes that this film's dealing with, but I think it is interesting in that it is critiquing, although it's it's set in an historical context, but we know that all these factors are still a problem. So gender-based violence is still a problem, and child marriage and child sexual abuse, and sexual and domestic violence, and it's touching on all of these topics in a way that I think it is a feminist film. I think that you would be hard pushed to suggest that it weren't. And I think it's interesting to see, again, for Netflix to have been like on board with this, I think is a positive sign that they're saying, actually, what we need is to see these stories and to see this representation. And pulling up folklore that I'm going to talk about now, but, pulling on that and using it in this story, I think is so well done. And it shows, and we've talked a lot about folklore, I mean, throughout the podcast, but in this series in particular, but the way that it's used in this film, I think, is very innovative, and to draw on it. But shall we dive?
Yes, let's go.
So, the figure. So there's various names, and I'm hoping I'm getting the pronunciation right. So the figure of the Shudil, and I think it's Shurel rather than Churel, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
But I'll say Shuril anyway, and if I'm wrong, everybody, I apologise. But that's part of the stories that Bulbbul and Satya tell each other. And this is a figure that is commonly referred to as a witch, although some would say that's an inaccurate representation of what this figure actually is. But for the purposes of this series, We're gonna draw on that. But I think what you said anyway at the start about, you know, witchcraft and being a man-made creation is really relevant. And there's a massively rich culture of folklore and myth around this figure, which I am going to attempt to summarise, but I shall not be concise because I got very excited. So also known as a shuril, a shurail, a shudale, and a pishal peri. These are some examples. So essentially, as this figure appears in different parts of sort of across Asia and things like that, we see different names. So as we see in the film, and I'll stick to shuril for ease, this is a woman with long dark hair covering her face and backwards feet. Now, Clelia knows this about me, but I don't know if everybody else does, which is that every time I get in a taxi, I ask taxi drivers if they believe in ghosts. Did you know that about me? You did, I think.
Yeah, I did.
So every single time I get in a taxi, I ask people if they believe in ghosts. And the amount of taxi drivers who've told me a story about a woman with backwards feet is incredible. So when you suggested this film and I was watching it, I was like,
fantastic. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, oh my God, this is so weird. Because I hear about this all the time. And lots of stories about, oh, you know, like my granddad saw one and my brother saw one and this happened. And I've heard it a lot from various people. So it's a very popular belief, I would say. And actually, you know, we do still see, not just in Bulbbul, but this is a character that turns up a lot in like modern day sort of literature and film and stuff. But they're said to appear as beautiful women who are only exposed when men see that the feet are backwards, so they look normal. Quote unquote, until
except
they
for that.
except for the feet. But in some cases, men report that then once they've seen this woman, that she transforms into a tall demonic creature. I mean, same. Me too.
Yeah, once you see my feet, that's over.
And in some cases, so we see that the shuril is mostly described as, and this is a particularly, I think, harsh description, extremely ugly and hideous, but is able to shape-shift and disguise herself as a beautiful woman to lure men into the woods or mountains, where she either kills them or sucks up their life force or virility, turning them into old men. Again, same. So the true form of the shuril is described as extremely ugly with saggy breasts, a black tongue and thick rough lips, although sometimes she's reported to have no mouth at all. She might have a pot belly, claw-like hands and scruffy long pubic-like hair. I feel personally attacked. They are also described to have pig faces with large fangs or human-like faces with sharp tusks and long wild hair. And she's sometimes described as having a fair front but a black back, but the key element is the backwards feet, so that's the thing that is consistent throughout. So in some cases she's a beautiful woman, in some cases she's ugly but can make herself seem beautiful, but always the feet are backwards. In some stories, particularly creepily, she's said to appear as a pretty little girl in white clothes who seduces men away to the mountains. Well, I would suggest the problems with the men who are seduced by little girls, to be honest, but there we go.
Absolutely, yeah. I was saying, how can you tell something is written by a man?
Yeah, I read that. I was like, ugh. So they're said to roam the mountains of India and Pakistan and are reported often in rural areas. And in some stories, they appear in the woods at night, like we see in Bulbbul, to target lone men. And what's interesting is that most stories are told by survivors, so it's men who've seen and escaped from a shuril, rather than someone's been killed by one. So although they've got this reputation of, sucking men's virility, most people seem to survive and escape. But where do these stories come from, I hear you ask? So apparently there was a tribe, a majestic tribe, called the Abarimon, who were described by Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman author. So even from Roman times, we start to see these stories. And he said that such people were native to India, so when the Romans were off just, colonizing, they came across this tribe of people. So these Abarimon tribe lived with wild animals, and any attempt to capture them was useless because they were so ferocious. We can relate to that. And Pliny the Elder also said that they could only survive in their own habitat because of the air quality, which seems to me a very convenient excuse for why you didn't bring any back for anyone to see. But as a result, it wasn't possible for them to leave or be entrapped and stolen away because they would just die. I imagine it'd be like in Total Recall when he goes outside and his eyes pop out. So it's interesting, I think, that this mythology sort of starts with the idea of this group of people, but now we just hear about like demonic, vengeful women. So it's sort of being translated over time into this idea that it's just women who've got backwards feet and, you know, ferociously live in the woods. So how does a shirl come to be? Again, I hear you cry. How do we create one? So it's said that these legends actually originate in Persia. And this is a thing with this that I think is really interesting, and this is true for everything that we've talked about, but the way that these stories just travel and appear in different contexts and stuff, I think is so fascinating. But in Persia, they were described as spirits of women who died with grossly unsatisfied desires, which I thought was very interesting, and are also referred to as the ghost of an unpurified living thing. So this purity thing's coming in already. And also seen as a tree spirit. So we see that in Bulbbul, where she's, you know, in the woods and she's very quick at climbing trees and so on. And they often latch onto trees. But in Southeast Asia, it's said that a woman who dies cruelly or who dies an unnatural death will come back as a revenant shirl for revenge. So
that's really interesting, the connection with tree that you've mentioned. I didn't come across that, so it's really, again, like it's great to have like brought this element to it in the film. But
The scene is very rooted in nature, very, either mountains or woods, or very tied to natural sort of environment.
And it's interesting because I read about the fact that it was women who had died in a cruel way, often in like domestic abuse, for example. But the grossly unsatisfied desire is really an interesting distinction, right? Because you're like, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah,
like.
It's I thought that were really interesting. So, you know, they're also, if they come back as this revenant, they particularly target men in the family, which, you know, we can all relate to. But they can also be women who died during childbirth or whilst pregnant or during this period of impurity, which is a common superstition in India, where it's said that a woman is impure during a period and then for 12 days after she gives birth. So again, we're tying this figure into these notions about, you know, impure women. And if someone dies in an impure state, that they're going to become this, vengeful revenant.
That could also explain the menstrual mist.
The menstrual mist, that could explain our menstrual mist. So if a woman dies during this period, so, you know, especially if this is if she's pregnant or on a period, or if it's 12 days after she gives birth, particularly if it's during Diwali, she will become a shirl. And it's also created if a woman dies in a lying room, which is the room where women give birth. And if a girl dies before she's 20 days old, she will become a shirl. It were initially also believed that only low caste women would become a shirl. So again, we're bringing in notions about, like, you know, class and privilege and stuff to this as well. And caste is something that isn't really talked about in Bulbbul. It's far too vast a concept for us to go into now. But I think it's interesting to see it tied to this idea that if you sort of a low person, that you're more likely to become this monstrous thing. You know, again, it's another way to demonize, another facet of demonization for women. So where do you find a shirl then? So as we've said, they can be found in forests and sort of jungle areas, but they also linger around cemeteries, creation grounds, abandoned battlefields, in household thresholds and crossroads.
Like us then.
Yeah, like us, but also toilets, very like us.
I should have let you finish that sentence before chiming in. I'm fucking smart ass over there.
What do you do? You know, what happens if you find one? So as we've mentioned, shirls lure lone men into the grasp. But if it's a woman who was died due to ill treatment by family members, then she avenges the death by going after the men in her family, starting with the youngest first. So essentially, she wipes out the bloodline. Good for you, I say. And she'll drain the youngest of blood until he's just a shriveled up raisin of an old man, and then she moves on to the next. And then when all the men in her family are dead, that's when she moves on to other people. So people who see a shirl can also be attacked by a deadly disease, and if someone answers her call at night, they can end up dead. So although we hear these stories from people who've survived it, who've sort of seen a woman with backwards feet and they've managed to escape her and run away, when you don't escape, death is imminent. Interestingly,
I think. Sorry,
go on.
so it's
No,
kind
go
of. I just find it really interesting because that depiction of of the Shirel as being that really evil demon that would wipe away an entire bloodline, but in the at the center of the story is really a morality story about not mistreating women, which is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of ironic really, those stories being invented by men, but that they fixate on the demonic aspect, on this horrible demon that comes and and devours the the youngest in the family and stuff like this, rather than being kind of like those horrible things that men are doing that creates those monsters in the weird sense of the way, because you kind of you created you're the one who created the evil that is then in the world. So.
Well, and this is what we're coming up for me again and again, is like the way although it's a way to demonize women, I feel like the fear around them is a way to protect women, because it's basically saying, like you said, don't mistreat women, don't kill women, look after pregnant women, a way to sort of use that fear.
Yes.
To advantage in a way. I mean, I'm not saying that that's enough, because we know it's not, but. And also, I think it speaks to a wider, that sort of social anxiety and social shame about like femicide and domestic violence, and the way that I thought it was interesting that if a girl dies before she's 20 days old, well, we know that girls are in a lot of countries are not wanted. People only want boys, and so there's a lot of infanticide associated with this myth. So like a way that you can't, if you kill this baby.
Exactly. I mean, it's really interesting. So it's really interesting to see folklore being used in a social justice sort of way. So yeah.
I think so. But there is also, I mean, obviously we'd have to get to sex at some point. They're also said to visit unmarried teenage boys and have sex with them, and if they don't leave them alone after that they'll slowly waste away. So this idea that they drain the life from the very vampiric, I think.
Yes.
There's a real sort of vampire aspect to this idea of draining life force and vitality, and even blood to a point. So, but also in some cases she does feed on his semen. Gross. But again, that idea about a woman stealing exactly. It's all tied up to this toxic masculinity. But she sometimes imprisons men in a lair in a graveyard and drains the blood slowly over time. And in some cases, she will keep this man captive until he's old, or use him sexually until he withers and dies and joins her in death. I mean, there's worse ways to go, I'm sure. But in Persian legend, it's said that travellers would see her footprints and would try to run the other way, but they'd run straight into her clutches because her feet are backwards. So that's like a way that she tricks people into which way is she going. Yeah, she's so smart. Apex predator. She knows what she's doing. So how do you get rid of a shirel? Well, as we've sort of touched on, the main thing is not to create one. So take good care of pregnant women. Don't kill women unnaturally and cruelly. Look after little baby girls, do all these things that you're supposed to do. However, if that has not been done, and this woman has come back as this angry revenant, there's certain measures that can be taken to prevent the shirel from coming and causing problems. So the family of a woman who dies from a traumatic or unnatural death can perform specific rituals. And the corpses of suspected shirels, or people who would become one because they've died in one of these ways, are also buried in such a way that they can't escape the grave. So this involves filling the grave with thorns and heavy stones. And if a mother dies in childbirth, the child is cut from the mother and they're buried in the same grave. And it reminds me of I don't know if you've seen about these vampire burials that they've found recently in Eastern
Yes,
Europe.
yeah. So, that seems unnecessarily, cruel post-mortem.
Yeah, to fill a grave with thorns and stones. And but, in these... I've written a chapter recently, a paper on vampire folklore, so I've been thinking about vampires a lot and these vampire burials, but I think it's interesting because we have to be very... These are graves that they've found that are from... centuries before in some cases. And so we're applying this idea that they thought they were vampires. It's not necessarily that they did. So I think we have to be careful with applying like our modern day interpretation.
Sure.
But this is the way. So, you know, in these graves in Eastern Europe, people are buried under stones. They've got coins in their mouth, or they've been decapitated or whatever. So we see this, and it's a similar thing with the Shirl. And like you say, it's particularly cruel to do that to someone who's already died an unnatural death, and then they're treated like this. But some women are also cremated to prevent the body from rising again, and cremation is a common practice anyway in sort of Hinduism, and I think even in Buddhism, although if I'm wrong, forgive me. I think, but rituals also require carrying the body out of the house from a side door rather than a front door to confuse the spirit. And if a woman dies during childbirth or during a menstrual cycle, a corpse is anointed with 5 different products of a cow. I'm not sure what products, but 5 different products from a cow, and special texts are read. And also, I thought this were interesting because this is something that comes up in various stories, is that the place where a woman who could become a Shirl dies is carefully scraped and earth is removed, and then mustard seeds are sown, and then mustard seeds are also scattered along the road that the corpse travels on way to the burial ground. And this is because mustard blossoms grow in the realm of the dead, and so the sweet smell will please the spirit and keep her content. So we see mustard seeds and mustard blossoms very much associated with Shirls and prevention, which I think is a really interesting, really interesting aspect of it. But again, that tie to nature, that sort of
yeah.
And it's also said it's because if the spirit returns at night and sees these mustard seeds, that she'll be distracted and try to sort of pick them all up. But while she's doing that, the sun will rise, and then she'll be unable to return back to her home to cause any problems. And we see a lot of that in folklore, ways to like confuse the spirit, or and then how else? So in some
it's like assuming all these demons have ADHD or something.
Yeah,
it's like, so easily distracted. Oh no, the sun's up. Oh well, never mind, I'll try again next time.
Shit, again, I've got distracted again every time. But yeah, and it's also some believe that the only way to free the victim of a Shirl is to sacrifice a goat. In some villages, stone structures are used, like a little Stonehenge, to ward off the Shirls. But this is particularly brutal, so you might want to skip this, people, if you're squeamish. Women are also buried with 4 fingers and toes nailed together, and then the thumbs and big toes are roped together with iron rings to keep them in a like contorted, so they can't get out of the grave, which is awful. And according to some beliefs, the most evil Shirls, so I don't know how you decide that someone is the most evil, have their eyes sewn up with thorns and the hands and legs broken. And then they're laid face down in the grave and mustard seeds are scattered. Others protect themselves by tying up the corpses of women who die in childbirth, if the child survives. And some groups actually, to prevent, so prevalent is the belief that they bury all women face down while all men are buried on the backs. So these are some ways that people try to prevent Shirls. But what I thought was interesting when I was looking at this is that we see very similar figures in other cultural contexts as well. So in folklore from Dominican Republic, there's the Ciguapa, who are commonly described as having a human female form with brown or dark blue skin, backward-facing feet, and very long manes of smooth, glossy hair that covers their bodies. And they're supposed to inhabit the high mountains of the Dominican Republic. But what's interesting is that people have suggested that there is no way that this belief from Persia and then into India could have got to Dominican Republic. So how did it get there? And this is what I think is so interesting about folklore, is what is the central human fear that this woman represents, that means these stories are appearing in these absolutely, like, you know, so far apart. I'm not suggesting no one from India has ever gone to Dominican Republic, but for it to take hold in such a way when they're so far apart geographically, I think is really interesting, because that suggests to me that there is something intrinsic in human nature and fears that this woman, this figure, represents.
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, like well, first of all, it means that we find the same violence against women.
Well, yeah,
you know, everywhere we go, and you know, the need to, well, I would say both to control women, you know, in such a way, even in death, you know, in this couple. But it is really interesting that he appears, you know, he pops up in, you know, such different places, but in variations that are really quite similar.
Yeah.
So that's incredible, really.
Yeah. And in Brazil, we find the Curupira, which is a mythological figure that's present in the Tupi-Guarani myths in the Amazon rainforest. So the name comes from the Tupi language and means covered in blisters. But according to cultural legend, this creature has bright red or orange hair that can ignite and turn into fire. Can't understand why I would like that guy. And it resembles a man, but its feet are turned backward. And it lives in the forest and uses its feet to create footprints that confuse Freudian slip, confuse hunters and travellers. It can also create illusions and produce a high-pitched whistle that drives the victim to madness. But what I think is interesting about this, tying into this idea of, the shural and nature, is that this, so the Kurapira preys on poachers and hunters who take more than they need, and attacks people who hunt animals that are taking care of the babies. So very much like tied into nature and protecting nature. And apparently this is the first figure of folklore to ever be recorded in Brazil. So a very long history.
Wow.
But again, this backwards feet thing is very interesting. So going back to shurals, because I do want to talk about the goddess Kali. Another patron saint for our podcast. So shurals can turn into dakinis, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is a type of female spirit or goddess or demon, and serve Kali, joining the goddess in her feasts of human flesh and blood. And we see Kali in the film as this incredible statue of her, and she's the goddess who returns Bulbbul to life. So Kali is a major Hindu goddess who is associated with time, change, creation, power, destruction, and death. And she's actually said to destroy evil in order to defend the innocent, although then there are these conceptualizations of her as eating human flesh and blood. So she's a very interesting, quite complex character. And she's been present in various traditions and actually worshipped by numerous devotional movements. So she's very prevalent. And she's worshipped as the divine mother and like the mother of the universe, and seen as the ultimate reality and the divine protector. So when you said about Bulbbul coming back and she's like the divine feminine, that links to Kali as like the ultimate mother, the mother of all. And she is seen as responsible for moksha or liberation. But she's also called Kali Mata, which is the dark mother. So there's this idea that she's, like I said, very complex in terms of how she's presented. But in terms of how she looks, she's said to be dark blue or black, like the statue we see in the film. She's black, but quite often paintings depict her as dark blue. But she has a tiger skin sari and a garland of human heads.
Wow, love that for her.
And so it's interesting you mentioned Durga and the grass at the end, because Kali's origin stories, so there's a couple of origin stories, but one states that she appeared from the forehead of the goddess Koshiki when she was attacked by two asuras who were demigods. But in another, it's that she emanates from the goddess Durga to slay the demon Raktabija. So Durga and her assistants, who are known as the Makias, tried to kill Raktabija, but when they cut him, every drop of blood that landed on the floor turned into another mini version, so they could not destroy him. And then Kali appears. So much like in the story about Kashika, she appears from Durga's forehead. So she always seems to be coming out of people's forehead, which I think is, well, where else would she come from? I mean, the forehead is as good a place as any. But she...
Third eye, you know?
Actually, why didn't I think of that? I was like, why the forehead? Yes, the third eye, for God's sake. Yes, absolutely. So she emerges from Durga's forehead and proceeds to suck up all this blood before it can touch the ground, thus destroying him. So she is then framed as Durga's personified wrath and her embodied fury. That's how someone's termed her. And I'm like, that is so badass. Like, that is so cool. So so she is seen as like the embodiment of rage, which I think we see in Bulbbul when she sits up and she screams.
Absolutely.
She is. So in that moment, she's like Kali's embodied rage, which I think is such an interesting... there's so many layers in film. I just think it's
so
brilliant.
Strong.
But we see sort of two depictions. So there's a popular 4-armed form, and then there's a 10-armed avatar. But in both, she's black, as I've said, although popular artworks depict her as blue. But her eyes are red with intoxication and rage. Again, we can relate. Her hair's a mess and she's got small fangs and a tongue that lolls from her mouth, which we see in the statue in the film. And sometimes she wears a skirt made of human arms and she's accompanied by snakes and a jackal. So very strong, very strong representation. But in her hands, so in the sort of popular four-armed form, she holds a sword and a severed head. So the sword signifies divine knowledge and the head signifies the ego that must be slain in order for divine knowledge to be achieved, which then leads to liberation. So she's seen as leading people through the death of the ego, through divine knowledge to liberation, which again fits with Bulbbul. The idea that Bulbbul has to die in order to be liberated, because it's only in death that she's truly liberated from all these sort of chains, which is, it's so brilliant. I mean, watch it, everybody. Watch the film. But in her other two hands are held into two mudras. So the Abhaya mudra for fearlessness and the Varada of a blessing. So essentially it means that anyone who worships her with a pure heart will be saved and guided by her into the afterlife. So you see loads of these representations in paintings and statues and things like that. But she's seen as sort of Brahman in its supreme unmanifest state. So she's like the ultimate reality, the ultimate expression of reality, and she's therefore, so she has no permanent qualities. We're getting very into sort of existential like thought here, and I've been doing a lot of this as part of my yoga. I'm training to be a yoga teacher, everyone. So like Brahman and all this stuff and mudras, I'm like in it. So yes, which probably were part of the reason why I spent all day doing this deep dive into this. But she's seen as this like supreme unmanifest state, and so she's so this idea that concepts are like darkness and light and good and evil don't apply to her because she is supreme. She's not of she basically like is the universe, and she'll continue to exist after the universe ends. So she's like apart from all these concepts. So to frame her as good or bad is not possible. So depending on the belief that people hold, some people see confrontations with Kali as requiring courage to withstand her terrible appearance. I mean, I think she looks badass, but some people are frightened. Fine. So some people think that you need to have courage to withstand a confrontation, whereas others adopt an attitude of a child that just love her unreservedly. So this total, boundless, unlimited love. And in both cases, the goal is for the person to accept the reality of death and the way things are. So that's what she really represents. She's like the concept of death, and that we must accept it, which I think is really interesting in terms of that idea of, divine knowledge and the death of the ego. Again, I'm entrenched in this at the minute, but it's very interesting. And she's worshipped across the world, so there's links to Buddhism and Hinduism, but also what I thought were very interesting, again, thinking about that idea of how folklore and figures of folklore move globally. We see her influence in the West as early as medieval times, and it's theorised that Romani people brought tales of Kali with them, and this ended up being translated into Saint Sarah, who is the patron saint of the Romani, who is also known as Sarah la Kali, which is Sarah the Black. So we still see I think May 24th is Sarah's saint day, and people in France, you might know more about this than me. In France, they have a big festival where they take a statue out to the sea, and it's meant to represent her coming to France. It's fine if you don't know. I didn't know about it.
Never heard of it. Sorry.
But I thought it was so interesting that we see this ancient concept of Kali, this goddess, represented in Saint Sarah, who has it's amazing to see how far it's travelled down. Yeah, and also the Rolling Stones logo is based on the stuck-out tongue of Kali as well, just as a little fact there.
Just a little pop quiz there.
So yes, I could have gone on for hours and hours, but I thought I'll cut it off there. So Kali is the Dark Mother, she is all, and we love her. But I just thought it was just so fascinating how this idea of the showreel is a way to, it's a manifestation of this gender-based violence and fears surrounding it and anxiety and cultural shame, I think, around the mistreatment of women. But then the way that this ties in to Kali and the idea of the Dark Mother and the Divine Mother and the Divine Feminine. It comes back to everything that we just keep talking about all the time, doesn't it? Like, you just...
Yeah, I mean, it's so rich and it's so interesting to see, for you to contextualize it in that way, to understand really how, how this all feeds into, this film, but also, how this feeds into our own folk culture and, how the beliefs around the world. And it's kind of incredible to, well, as I said, she's the universe, she's everything. And it's kind of like, and it shows because clearly, it's like, all, even not just even in terms of religion around the world, but like all system beliefs and stuff. It's like, it's really it goes from that, and it's kind of it's just, I just find it so fascinating. So sorry I've been a bit quiet through all this, but it's kind of like there's a lot to absorb, but I was actually genuinely fascinated by the stuff you were talking about. So yeah, thank you.
No. Thank you for everyone for listening every time I go into one of these deep dives, because it gives me great joy to do it. But yeah, I think we'll see more of Carly probably. I'm sure there's other films that have drawn on that, but I thought the way that Bulbbul did it were very through that feminist lens, and she has been sort of claimed or I don't know, really reclaimed, because I think this as a bit like other figures have, claimed as a feminist goddess, that she's, and she's just cool as shit, and we love her and want a garland of human heads of our own.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I suppose, recommendations, what do we have? I know you've given a little spoiler of one of yours.
Yeah, I've got a few. So, but although could go on with a very, very long list, but I've picked a few there. So the first one that I mentioned was Charulata, which was inspired by a story from that poet. And sorry, I don't have the. Again, just go back to the beginning of the podcast to find the name again. But was adapted by a film by Satyajit Ray in 1964, and I think that would be a great double bill with Bulbbul. Also Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I think was undeniably a point of reference for the look of the film. Nagin, which is an amazing 1976 Bollywood film. And if you like this idea of the shape-shifting feminine revenge story, then this one is absolutely for you. It's about a shape-shifting cobra whose lover is killed by a group of hunters, and she shapeshifts into a woman to lure them to death. And it's absolutely fucking bonkers, and it's just absolutely brilliant. So definitely recommend this one. Another one is Tumbad from 2018, and it's really so another Bollywood film that did really, really well on the international scene actually, and that you can find on Amazon Prime. And it's and I know, like, we've been talking a lot about folklore and fake lore, and this one, like Bulbbul, is another one that uses existing folklore and Hindi deities, but turns it into its own fake lore for the purpose of the film. And you talked about the idea of caste, and it's not something that's very much explored in Bulbbul, but in Tumbad, that's very much the base of the story. So it's kind of like a fable and a morality story about greed. So it's absolutely fantastic. So just the look of the film is just incredible, and we kind of want to see more films like this coming out of this part of the world. And the last recommendation I have is Bulbbul from 2007, which again did incredibly well on the international scene, and again is kind of a fable, but a story of a ghost story about possession, and includes lots of elements of folklore, of Hindi folklore. So but I could go on and on about. In fact, I'll post a list of recommendations because I just love Indian cinema. So yeah, what about you?
Yeah, me too. I went the other way. In terms of, I went initially for something a bit more gothic. I just think that The Haunt in a Hill House feels maybe not a direct reference in the film, but that idea of the haunted house, and this, and obviously any excuse to recommend A Haunt in a Hill House. And then I was thinking about vengeance and revenge and women with revenge. So I had to say Lady Vengeance, because I think Lady Vengeance is one of the best
Definitely
films
up
ever
there.
made, but also like revenge films. And then I also said Audition as well, because I think that's a really interesting take on masculinity and patriarchy and what that looks like in a society when a woman decides that that's not for her.
Fantastic.
So they were my recommendations. But yeah, much like you, I love I think global cinema generally, but particularly I were really glad that we got to do this podcast. And also clearly is going to do a list, but if anyone else has films that they would recommend,
please let us know.
Always
absolutely.
let us know. But yeah, so excellent pick from Clelia for this week, and I'm very glad we got to talk about it.
Me too. It's so exciting. It's really great to be able to cover a bit more international cinema in this season. So excited, and excited for the next episode as well, which is another international pick.
Yes.
So we're doing well.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that one. Thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh. Please join us next time for more discussion about witches. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can access our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. We'd love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels. Also, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. Until next time, creep it weird, everyone!